I feel passionate about connecting children to nature in the places that they live and visit on a day-to-day basis. And food is a great place to start the conversation.
My role as an urban agriculture educator is to provide opportunities for people to engage with agriculture and food.
Hello, I'm Chris Murakami, and I work at the Assessment Resource Center, which is at the University of Missouri in their College of Education.
I'm Heather Gillich. I'm the Programs Director at the Columbia Center for Urban Agriculture.
And we're presenting today our paper, Learning to Become Good Food Educators, the Philosophies and Program Features of the Columbia Center for Urban Agriculture.
We're sorry to not be there in person, but we've prepared a movie for a representation of our paper, and we hope to be available for questions via phone at the end of this presentation. I came to Columbia, Missouri in 2012 as an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer, and I intended to stay for just that 1 year, but it turns out that the work really got me excited, and I was able to stay and continue doing this work. And during that first year that I was here, I met Chris, and he really sort of taught me a lot about the way that Columbia was interested in having good food education.
So then I moved in 2010 to Columbia, and I had an interest in general in food and garden education, and I was starting a PhD at the University of Missouri in science education, and I happened to stumble upon a group of characters really in a community garden that was just a block from my house. And I started showing up and pulling weeds and asking questions to try to figure out, what they were doing, why they were doing it. But then became, pretty involved in the early phases of this forming nonprofit organization, and tried to contribute what I knew, which was, having some background in curriculum development, some background in teaching and education. And then I was developing my skills as an education researcher also, so I started kind of using CCUA in pilot projects that were part of my qualitative methods courses, and became really interested in what were the shared values of the Columbia Center for Urban Agriculture, and what were the kind of the motivations and things that guided their practices or their work of particularly urban agriculture education. But we really, for this chapter, we focused on the education programming and how that changed really from the period of 2008 up until, in the paper we focused on it up until 2014, but we have some reflections from 2015, and we can provide some updated context in terms of what's happening now. I conducted a round of interviews with the founders of the Columbia Center for Urban Agriculture, and that was in 2011. And I did a qualitative analysis of that using some in vivo software, but really trying to kind of identify what those key practices were for the organization. And I developed a working kind of theoretical model that we call the healthy ecosystems model. So when we asked the question, what does it mean to become an urban agriculture educator? Really the answer to that is you need to practice managing healthy soil ecosystems. And so we developed this metaphor, and we were able to have some follow-up a few years later with not only Heather, but some of her kind of education staff to really see to what extent is this model still relevant, and then how has the organization changed over time. And so the big overarching piece is this idea of participating in the community ecosystem, and to me this represents at the most basic level this idea that the work that they're doing as urban agriculture educators, it's impacting the ecosystem, it's impacting the social system. That means that the relationships that CCUA has with the community and the partnerships that develop need to be tended to appropriately, but that there's this kind of history, and there's politics, there's economics, there's culture, all these things that are involved and that impact those relationships. So in the beginning, some of the first education programming really came from the relationships that CCUA, its original founders, had with the broader community. And there's a quote from the interviews that we have with the founders where they said that they were just throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that's changed over time? Or
Yeah, even the organization at CCUA has doubled since the beginning of this. We now have 12 employees, and it's kind of a mix of full-time staff, AmeriCorps members, and also part-time seasonal staff. But just as kind of our organization has grown, we've grown inside it as well. So we have a different approach now where we're not necessarily throwing as many things against the wall, but really considering the partnerships that we're making and the ability that those partnerships and relationships will have to affect the broader community and the way that good food education is regarded, so that we can actually sort of move the dial on whether students are choosing and selecting healthy vegetables and fruits as a part of their regular diet, and understanding that that food origins are an important part of consuming food in Columbia, Missouri.
the next part of our model is really about this kind of managing healthy soil. And I decided to start with this as a metaphor because really the CCUA started by biking food scraps to build high-quality compost that becomes the kind of source for productive gardens and productive urban agriculture. So this first dimension, the balancing fertility, just means to me and to the organization the encouraging engagement, excitement, and creativity, while also making progress towards a more sustainable food system. And so it also includes, the idea that there are different resources that need to be managed, like that level of engagement, but also financial resources, energy that fuels the work that happens for the organization, and those sort of things need to be attended to. And kind of from the beginning, there was so much excitement and engagement and just like doing something to try to take action. I mean, a lot of the founders, they were recent college graduates, basically trying to make a change in the world. And it's really been interesting to see how those things have kind of changed over time. But this idea of balancing fertility and managing those resources, those fuel sources, has still been important.
Yeah, absolutely. CCUA has really been able to harness the passion that we all bring to good food education and to good food in general. But keeping in mind that we're cultivating ourselves as good food educators, as well as cultivating the learning of others, means that we have to take care of ourselves and the health of our organization, in addition to taking care of making sure that our programs are running effectively and efficiently, and that they are continuing to pay the respect to those relationships and partnerships, and making sure that we're providing for the community what is something that the community needs, and really taking into account hearing the voices of the participants and making sure that moving forward with good food education, that we're providing the type of education that people need and want. We make choices as an organization when we are developing new programs and seeking new methods for getting funding for those programs and ideas. For every relationship that we make that is a sort of fiscal relationship, we have to think about what our core values are and make sure that we all agree as an organization that those are things that we want to do moving forward, that our core values are something we're not able to or interested in compromising. But sort of the other side of that, there is this opportunity cost for staying true to those values. But it's something that we have to think about all the time when we're creating this healthy organization, is that part of that health for us is maintaining our internal values.
So we can move on a little bit and talk about this idea of improving structure. Again, back to like the soil science and the soil metaphor. Improving structure is the arrangements of the particles that are in soil. So really, at the organization level, it's the idea that the leaders in the organization itself had to develop in a structure and develop structures and roles and things like that in an appropriate way to make sure that the work can get done as urban agriculture educators. I think the quotation, which I believe comes from a book that one of the founders read, is the idea of like you have to get the right people on the bus, but then you have to get them in the right seat also.
As an organization, we've gone through a couple of iterations of arranging human resources, and I think that we'll continue to be very dynamic in the way that we're doing this. In one way, that provides the opportunity for employees to grow in positions. And as we learn more about ourselves and we learn more about the environment in which we're operating and gain more skills as professionals, we're able to really take on different roles in sustaining the organization. And I think we've made a couple of big changes in sort of being able to get the right people in the right place at the right time to do the right work for this community.
Yeah, so this kind of all leads to this idea of balancing fertility and then improving structure. Back to the soil metaphor, those things allow for enhanced biologic activity. And so this dimension kind of represents what the outputs are for the urban agriculture, education, nonprofit world, and we could think about those outputs in a number of different ways. So like literally the food that is grown, or keeping track and monitoring of where that food is going after it's grown, and then some of the other learning outcomes that might be associated with that. But to me, this dimension just helps the organization think, say, like, well, what are these valuable outcomes or products that we should be assessing progress towards?
So I think that this model really informs not only what we're doing, but also how we're deciding what parts of that are important. And what parts of that are things that we need to keep doing moving forward. It's really easy in nonprofit work to get really sort of tied into the day-to-day, and this allows us to kind of have that 30,000-foot view of how we're really impacting the whole community, and maybe a little bit less about the numbers necessarily.
And a lot of this work just really makes me think about my role as a researcher, and then my desire to be involved in community engaged research and scholarship, and trying to make sure that the work that I do is bringing something to your organization, because I know that I get benefits out of working with you all. Could you talk a little bit about just kind of those tips or ideas for how what you need from a researcher, or what role a researcher could play to help move your organization or organizations like yours forward?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of practical applications. We have noticed that, speaking of our partnerships, one of our really big partners in Columbia is the university, and so I think that while we're bridging this gap kind of between academia and practitioners and what we're doing on a day-to-day basis as sort of separate entities, there are a lot of places where overlap can occur. And program evaluation is kind of the crux of moving our programs to the next level. And so being able to interact with researchers who really understand what information is necessary to show that we're moving the dial on something, that our partnerships are effective, that and figuring out how those outputs that we're creating are actually turning into outcomes, because that's language that we use, but we don't necessarily have enough information, enough data that has been created to really help us show that what we're doing has value, and that's something that's really necessary if we're going to move forward and continue to sustain the organization. I can be contacted via email at education@columbiaurbanag.org, and our office phone number is 573-514-4174.
And my email is murakamic@missouri.edu, and I look forward to hearing comments and questions and being able to share some of the work that we've done. Thanks so much.